This is Beyond the Natural Man, a place where three men come together to share their thoughts, view unique life experience while exploring together what the hell it means to be a man in this ever-changing world.
My name is Matthew Dank. My background, I guess, is 18 years in the military, so 12 in Navy, and then 4 in Air Force as a pilot in both services, and 2 years before that in the Defence Academy training to be an officer. I stepped out of the Navy and Air Force altogether in January this year. I'm in the group here to explore, I guess, concepts of manhood and manliness, and to learn and to share and be transparent and open, which is something I haven't done a hell of a lot in my life, particularly for the first 20 or 30 years.
I am Adam. I own my own business, small batch manufacturing custom car parts for Japanese vehicles, and I sell them all over the world. I absolutely love my job and what I do, but my real passion is personal development. I love exposing issues with myself and working on them. I have a bigger goal to lead by example for young men, and I would love nothing more than to show young men that they can overcome their obstacles despite their upbringings and live a successful life. And that's my goal of being here.
I'm Gary. By day, I'm a business development professional working for a major utility. My specialty is in technology commercialisation and frontier business development, market development, new products. By night, I'm a father and a husband, and my passion is really about personal development and growth. What I'm trying to get out of this podcast is just a sense that I can share a little bit about my journey, and in the hope that it will improve the journey of other men.
So today we were going to talk about expressing needs.
Yeah, so for me, I think the needs piece really came up with the No More Mr. Nice Guy book, and it hit a massive nerve and really resonated, really in terms of what they cast, I think, of the nice guy, who's someone who doesn't think they have needs, don't acknowledge their own needs and don't pursue them, and instead they fall into a role of doing things that are really common to me, I think, when I was younger in particular, which is one's caretaking, which is taking care of people and volunteering to do things without really having that full, genuine intent, but doing it in a manner to appease people or to otherwise, I guess, appeal. It's not having a strong sense of self. It's not being comfortable around conflict and either avoiding it or giving in or acquiescing in conflict as if it's something that's not necessary or something that can be avoided in life. And it's also not setting boundaries or being aware that, I can set boundaries and it's my right to set boundaries and push back on things that I don't believe in. So I think those things, I barely had a sense of them existing before reading the book. But as soon as I read it, it was like, that was me from day dot. And I think in my family, that's something that's been, set up from a young age, and particularly my father being very, very selfless, I guess, and not identifying any of his needs, having 5 children, a fairly low education background, public sector employment, and not pursuing vigorously any passions, not pursuing a financial path or anything that would really reflect or give him fulfillment other than, fathering and having kids. And often it was a sense of having those kids were not a burden, but that took up all of his time and all of his effort and certainly all of his money. And he was, I guess, passionless a lot of the time. He was in his motives having his kids, and that was it. And he hadn't really defined a role for himself beyond that. So the book really struck a chord, really taught me to think, and brought up a whole bunch of topics that I'll dig into today.
I resonated a lot with not having my needs met and not having the self-worth to ask for what I wanted or not even knowing what I wanted. No More Mr. Nice Guy book exposed that within me. My little story on how I came about feeling comfortable expressing my needs was a kinesiology session, and it was a time regression to a point where a little version of me, a little baby Adam, didn't get his needs met. That was really powerful for me. The process was meditative. I went from being 37 at the time and down an elevator. The elevator stopped at the year where I didn't get my needs met, and that was 4 years old. And I went on a journey of getting 4-year-old Adam's needs met as a grown man now. That's how I discovered getting my needs met is important versus just pushing them to the side or not feeling I have any self-worth.
I feel like the whole discussion on needs and having my needs met highlighted for me just how far I've actually come, because it took me a really long time to understand the fact that I had needs other than sexual needs. So for a really long time, I would say my relationships were tainted by some fairly shitty behaviours where the idea of covert contracts played out daily. I would do things expecting to be rewarded. I would do things for my partner to expect sex or sexual gratification in return. And it wasn't really until I became close to my 40s where I really understood a bit more about needs for me on a more fundamental level and how to express them in a healthy way. And I don't feel like I'm a particularly needy guy. I don't need to be stroked and told I'm fabulous. I don't need a lot of verbal reassurance, but I do understand my love languages. I do understand that some verbal affirmation is a requirement for me. I'm very physical, so I understand the physical side as a necessity in a relationship. But for a really long time, I really flew blindly. I really had no idea on how to express those needs in a healthy way. I really didn't know how to have an open, honest, authentic conversation with my partners and now with my wife. And it's a really big step forward, and it's really uncomfortable because approaching my needs requires a bit of vulnerability and understanding that it's actually okay to need certain things. It's okay to have needs in a relationship other than sexual needs. It's okay to have needs in my friendships and my workplaces that aren't really superficial. But for me, there was a lot of conditioning over a really long period of time where things with mates, the need was to get pissed or to get stoned or to go and party or to go and do something, go surfing. That was the actual need. What I actually needed in the case of, for example, going surfing was to go out and be in a very contemplative state in a natural environment and realizing that that's super important for my mental well-being. And nowadays I can feel when the tension rises through my day, through work, through other things, I now know that I need to be outside in a natural environment. I need to be away from people. I have a fairly low social tolerance at best. I get socially fatigued pretty easy. I can be articulate and very engaging for brief periods of time, and then I need to step away. Like, I don't do great in crowded environments for really long periods of time, but I now recognize that's not a deficiency. It's just recognizing that when that happens, I need to do something. I need to take myself out of that environment. So for me, the conversation around needs is a maturity piece. And no one ever had a conversation with me in my teenage years or my 20s about it's okay to be a man and have needs other than sexual needs. I think when we talk about that as men in general, we tend to distill this straight down into sexual gratification. I have needs. Those needs need to be met. It's not just about that. There's like a whole load of other things that make us tick or make me tick. And it wasn't until I started a journey of self-exploration, for lack of a better term, that I felt like I even approached an understanding of what this is all about. So I really like this conversation as a topic, and I think there's a lot we can explore in here.
Totally agree. I feel like in my later years that my needs were dismissed because it always resulted in wanting sex, that I only had needs to get to the act of having sex, versus that I have needs in all avenues of my life, from the work to the friends to this conversation right now. It's a huge topic. I don't even know how to scratch the surface for a young man.
I think a really good, I hate to take someone else's thunder, but the whole life book experience for me, the way that it distills your life down into a whole series of critical elements that you need for happiness and fulfillment. There are a whole load of needs under those themes as well. So I have certain needs in a relationship. There are physical needs, there's emotional needs, there's a sense of partnership that I need out of a relationship. Similarly with social engagements and social relationships, there's certain needs that I have from those relationships. Physically, I need to be active. So I need to do a certain amount of weight-bearing exercise. Part of that is mental. Part of it is a recognition that for longevity and to maintain a level of physicality, I need to do certain exercises. So there's a need there. Financially, I know there's things I need to do with the way I manage my money, the way I save money, the way I spend money. So all of these things come together under a principle like Lifebook, where there's a whole series of themes. And I think that's a good one to start with, because if I take myself back to what I would have been like at the age of 25, let's say, old enough to have a little bit of wisdom under the belt, but still too young to really know what it's all about. At 25, if somebody had talked to me about needs, my needs would have been to get laid. That would have been it. That would have been the total extent. I would have said, I need to finish my studies, I need to get a job, and I need to get laid, and I need to go surfing. That would have been it. The lack of any understanding about the depth and the components that are required to make my life fulfilled really only came late in the game for me. Oh, actually, I won't say late. I'm only 45. So I think I've got the P plates off. Occasionally I feel like the training wheels should go back on.
I can agree with a lot of that, Gary, especially the maturity piece, I guess, and even as a starting concept, I think. And you talked about when you were 25, but for me, yeah, no different when I was 25. Probably later 20s, I was much the same. But just knowing that needs is something that's okay to have. I think for me, because I didn't see that from my parents, I didn't see them taking care of their own needs. They were extremely selfless, but they did very, very little for themselves, which for me didn't spread the idea in myself or in my family that it was okay to do so, that people could have needs. And not just myself, I'd see other people or friends or colleagues expressing their wants and their needs and desires, and I would think that was bizarre behavior, and that was almost outlandish, and they were being arrogant and rude because they were doing that. And I was very much Mr. Nice Guy himself, which was like, I don't have any needs, I'm just going to act out of instinct, which was to get drunk, to party, and to pursue women and pursue sex. But I saw that as just what life was. And anyone having any higher needs or articulating anything or anything emotional was, they were being ridiculous. They were being facetious and conceited. It was just ridiculous, that mindset. And I gave very little thought to that. So I think having the concept that it's natural to have and express needs and to articulate those and go on a journey and a search to find what they are, and that's something that'll come through maturity and through time. I think that's important to get out there and to spread as an idea. But I think resources like No More Mr. Nice Guy and the Lifebook and other resources, they're just great things to have out there in society, great things on the internet, and great things for people to reach out and get a hold of as soon as they can. Not necessarily 100% get on board them, but to know that they exist and they're something that people can resort to in their journey.
Super critical point, Matt, around the selfish versus selfless. When you spoke there about your parents, I would say my parents were the same, that it was all about self-sacrifice for the family and for the children and for the longer term vision. For me, it felt like doing something that they enjoyed. They almost held back from doing that because it was more about the self-sacrifice element. For me, it's taken a lot of effort to realise that there are certain things that I need to do for me, that I have one life, and yes, I am a husband and a father, but that's not the whole of what I'm about. And that idea that it's not selfish to have needs, I think it's selfish to put your needs ahead of everyone else's all the time. There is certainly requirements to make sacrifices. I am the sole breadwinner in my house. Therefore, if I want to just spend all my disposable income on things that make me satisfied, that's a very selfish thing to do because I have 3 other people in my household who I'm trying to take care of and provide for. But at the same time, if I take nothing for myself, I actually become really jaded. I become quite, I won't say nasty. I don't think it's nasty. I think I just become a bit resentful of the situation. And that does not help. That's the No More Mr. Nice Guy coming out. And when Robert Glover talks in the book about the victim puke, that was me for a really long time. I would sit there and bottle it all up, just couldn't articulate my needs in a way that allowed it to be released and brought to the surface and acted upon. I would just build it up and build it up, and suddenly I'd have a big spat over something. And my wife would be like, where the fuck did that come from? And I'd be like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And I would it would all rattle out. And I would see the look on her face. And there's this part of me that's like, how the hell don't you know all of this? But the reality is she doesn't know all of that because I'm not surfacing those needs in a healthy way at the right time. And I also don't have that balance in check. And it's important, I think, in my case, that I set the boundaries around that balance. I need to set some boundaries and set some terms. So for me to work all week, I don't feel it's inappropriate for me to head out on the boat with one of my friends to drink some beers and cruise up and down the river. In her mind, she's thinking, well, I've got to do all of this stuff around the house and I've got to look after the kids and they're at home on a weekend and you just go off for 8 hours drinking and sunning yourself on the boat. Well, I haven't actually verbalised that is a need that I have to fulfil because I feel entitled for that. She can't mind read, but it is important that that is surfaced in a healthy way. And I would say I've really struggled for a really long time to be able to do that.
I think Just listening to you both talk now, I don't think I have a grasp on my own needs. I think I've got it figured out on the surface. At the moment, between my wife and I, my only need is I need to be left alone. That's not a thought out or articulated thing. I am looking for space to figure out who I am because of the no more Mr. Nice Guy. Being a nice guy, not wanting to rock the boat, I don't focus on what I want and what I need. So I have not figured this out yet.
Neither have I, if that's anything. I mean, you're saying there, perhaps you don't know what your needs are. I don't think I know what my needs are as a thought, because I'm very thought focused. I'm very prefrontal cortex, whatever the brain part is. I'm very cognitive. I like to generate concepts and navigate life with concepts, which can be very artificial, I think. And that's a coping and an adaptive mechanism for me, because I've done a lot of emotional avoidance in my life. And I've written down needs and I have a concept of what they are as an idea, but that's not really them. Because what my needs are, they're an experience. They're experiential, they're emotional, they're in existence, and there's like visceral. Whilst you were talking, Adam, I conjured up the thought, thinking about the female role, the male role, or just femininity, masculinity. I conjured up the thought of men being alone and man time and solitude, and I was thinking of hunting an animal. I was thinking being in the wild, pursuing something, just going after that thing and, killing that animal, that act, and then recovering that body and recovering that meat. And like, what is that? That's some sort of a goal-orientated adventure, and that's pursuing something, and that's physical, and it's dangerous, and it's violent. Something I think sports brought me. It's a physical conquest and it's a competition, and it's just something visceral, and it's not something that I engage that part of my thinking brain in. It's something that I do and I can feel. Similarly, being around men and being outdoors in some sort of a competitive environment, being in a rivalry type environment and getting up to banter and getting up to that sort of engagement. I'll be in family circle. That's not even about the discussion for me when I'm around family. It's just about being present and exchange and warmth. And I think about reflecting off different generations. Today I was out on North Stradbroke and I met one of my wife's work colleagues. And he's a South African gentleman, and we're talking about corporate life and about selling your soul to the corporations and becoming a partner and all that sort of thing. He just had so much wisdom, and I just stood there and listened. I had a little bit to say, but not much, but I was just absorbed so much. To me, that intergenerational perspective was very apparent. And that's the sort of thing I just love, being around family, being around different generations, toddlers, children, adolescents, my role in it, and then the elders of the society. There's something in that for me. That's a need, and I can't put a finger on what that is. It's not a thought, but it is something that I've got, and I don't know if I've avoided it, but I've had less of that in my life than I would have liked, possibly from being away from family a lot with the military and moving frequently and being in a solitary type existence. But that fills a gap in me, and that makes me feel whole and enriches my life. There's a couple of needs for me.
Do you think it's an element of being emotionally aware that comes with articulating those needs and understanding those needs? So while you were speaking, I was thinking about the idea that needs, there's some very basic ones. We need water, air, shelter, clothing, food, that type of thing. But I think what we're talking about here is there's these emotional needs that sit under the surface. And I know for me, for a long time, the idea of having a deep emotionally connected conversation with another man was unheard of. That was like being a pussy. When we think about needs now, I don't want to use the term emotionally aware men. It almost sounds a little bit hokey, but part of the journey to manhood and understanding masculinity is realizing that those needs are real. They're not something that you can pretend that don't exist. And every man's different. Every man's got different underlying things that make them tick, and they would translate through to individual needs. But for a long time, for me in particular, the idea of being really emotionally in touch with what's going on inside me was just almost unheard of. It wasn't something that I would even consider, simply because of the conditioning of the environments that I grew up in. The men that I was around didn't talk like that. They didn't think like that. Other than the physical need, your other needs were almost unheard of in terms of being surfaced and acted upon. Maybe I'll pose that to the group. Is that something where recognition of those needs only comes after a certain level of emotional awareness?
I think for me, it was actively pushing them to the side. If I thought of anything that was selfish, I guess, it shouldn't have been available to me. That's how I interpret that. When I was young, I couldn't want for things, and if I did, I would feel bad for wanting the thing, or I'd have to put my mother in a position of saying no and explaining why we couldn't have the thing. I mean, it's the no more Mr. Nice Guy principle, but that's what formed my idea that I can't have needs, I can't express needs. And yes, it is that development over time. Even since we've been sitting here, needs are everywhere and they're forever changing with the situation, with new information. What I require, what I need, it definitely changes, but I still can't help but feel selfish for wanting something for myself. And I understand the line between needing something for myself to better myself and just being an arsehole or an arrogant bastard about something.
Do you feel like there's trigger points there where you get to a point where your needs are not being met and then you act out?
Yeah, I do act out. How it manifests with me is if I don't feel like I'm getting what I want, I'll make a substantial purchase. That's how I act out. As a young boy in my family, that's the one thing we couldn't do. And I think that's why it's what I do now. I don't yell at my wife or I don't demand anything. I'll make a silly financial decision. And that's how I act out.
Yeah, I do the same. If I feel like I'm being hard done by or I'm not getting the value out of the equation, if you know what I mean, everything's transactional. If I feel like I'm putting in way more than I'm getting back, I feel like I have to break that circuit and go and do something. Probably the two things is going out, getting a bit pissed or a bit loose and doing something a bit out of the ordinary, or making a purchase, deciding, no, fuck it. I feel like I want to wear a $200 shirt. I'm going to go and buy a $200 shirt. And then it sits in my cupboard and I'm like too scared to wear it because it's so good.
I think mine's more along the lines of the victim puke that you pointed out, Gary, and that's such a classic term, isn't it? I mean, that was me, Mr. Nice Guy, not knowing what his needs were and that he even had needs, and then just simmering tide of resentment just bubbling up. And I'm trying to push it down. I'm like, this is uncomfortable. Don't know what this is. Pushing it down, and it would just explode out somewhere, which would normally be some sort of, I don't know, arrogant or aggressive or just offhand remark and just disgusting display of behavior. And then it was like, oh, don't know what that was. I'll just cover that up, pretend that didn't happen. That was kind of awkward, but that happened, so it must be right. It must be just how things go. And I know I'd had this sense that something was wrong, that I was sort of repressing something, and then something came out. And I kind of feel not really vindicated or justified, but that was a natural consequence. Not that I liked it, other than the social consequences and what that did for relationships. I wasn't super disheartened by it. I was just like, this is uncool, but this is me, this is how I'm made up, and that just happened. But I guess in recent years for me, when I'm not getting my needs met, particularly around social situations, I'll sort of shut down a conversation. I'll just make it very clear that I'm going to go away and lock myself away and get my own time. And particularly with the military and the need to study and prepare for overseas missions, I did need a lot of time to think about things, and I couldn't do that in a communal setting. So I just made that clear, and I'd take off and end a conversation or cut short a family outing. I was having mat time. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, or that's something negative or antisocial, but I think not approaching that deliberately and not outlining that and having that conversation, making that known, was counterproductive. It's funny. There's the victim puke, and then there's just mat time, just solo time.
I like the concept of being deliberate around mat time. Hearing you speak, and I think reflectively, that's kind of what I do at times, where I'll feel like I've just got to take time out, and it will be a very reactive thing rather than a proactive thing. So something's happened, push my buttons, kids, wife, household pressures, work, it all just got too much. And it's like, no, fuck it, I'm going to take some time out. Now that could be as simple as grabbing a couple of beers and going and sitting by the river and just staring into space. Usually for me, it's walking. I'm a walker. Like I will literally just go out, park my car somewhere and go walking in the bush for 2 hours. But doing that in a way reactively, it's almost thumbing my nose at the people that it impacts. The kids don't know why dad's suddenly gone out, disappeared for 2 or 3 hours. Jen will feel quite impacted by that. She may not necessarily feel like she's done something wrong, but all of a sudden it's like, okay, I've just withdrawn myself from the situation. These days I'm a little more proactive about it. I think I can feel the tension building, and I start to plan my day a little bit when I realise, okay, I haven't worked out for a couple of days, hadn't been outside of the house or the office for a couple of days. Okay, I actually know my triggers now that I need to get out and do something proactive about that, rather than just waiting for it to build and build and build. So that point about being reactive, I think, is super important, because it's going over a bit of a threshold in your own personal understanding of realising, okay, that's something inside me that is a trigger that I need not to happen. I don't know whether I've mastered that, to be perfectly honest, but what I do feel like is I've got some big steps in the right direction. Just knowing, firstly, it's okay. Like, that's not a sign of weakness to realise, okay, all of that stuff's getting on top of me and I'm feeling like my head's getting a little bit crowded and I'm feeling tense and feeling a bit angsty about stuff. It's okay for that. It's also okay to take time out. I think in the family life, it's important that that's articulated the right way, at least for me, being able to clearly verbalise that, set time and set that in advance, because there are people that have schedules around me and have stuff going on. I can't just throw the white flag in and disappear. In my work day, I now get quite meticulous about blocking time out, particularly in the COVID time, where now I seem to be working longer hours than I've ever worked before. I'm at my computer by 6:30 and I'm still taking calls and Teams calls and Zoom calls into the early evening. So if I don't make a really purposeful decision to take time out and be proactive about that need to get that circuit breaker in my day, if I don't get that break in there, I can become quite difficult, as I'm sure my wife would attest to.
I definitely resonate with the being proactive or being reactive versus being proactive. I feel like my me time, my Matt time, my Adam time, I had dialed in until 6 months ago. And now I don't take a second for myself since the COVID situation. And it's sort of begun with taking the work while it was there. Things went well for me. But I feel like today, since we've started talking, I've just had this realization that I'm not me at the moment. I've stopped all that me time. I'm not training. I'm not doing anything that's not towards the cause. When I was thinking of the victim puke, I was thinking about going on a spiel or like this is all the things that have wronged me. But what you said, Matt, just the one little outburst, the one little thing, and yeah, I absolutely do that. It comes out in air quotes, a joke. And when I realized I was doing it, I had already lost credibility with my wife. I speak specifically of her, but all these little covert contracts or tricks to getting needs met. I feel like in the last 6 months, I'm regressing back to that person that I was 3 years ago. And this is an eye-opener for me that I do need to be proactive for me time. At the moment, I take 15 minutes here or there, like whatever I can get. I'll watch a YouTube video or something that's not to do with work, but yeah, it's not enough. It's not.
In leading people, I'm really quite open and forthright about work-life balance. When I have employees who are accumulating a lot of leave, for example, I don't tell them to take leave because it's a liability on the books. I tell them to take leave because they clearly haven't taken leave for a long time. And I know everybody has a different tolerance for stress and work. But when I see people that have 8 weeks of personal leave banked up, that's telling me they haven't taken a decent break in 2 years, more than 2 years. What I find almost hypocritical about that is I'm the sort of person that will bank up shitloads of personal leave because I'm like that. I don't take a break either. I think the day-to-day routine of taking breaks, I've got that reasonably well dialed in. What I don't have dialed in is taking longer, more purposeful breaks, like a real holiday to do something. For me at the moment, and my kids are at an age where I can't take an adventure holiday, let's put it that way. I'm not going to go trekking to Everest Base Camp with a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. Not that my wife's really into that shit either. So our holiday times tend to be based around school holidays or Christmas or Easter, seeing relatives, that type of thing. So for me, there's the immediate needs in getting the work-life balance dialed in day to day. There's this bigger need around trying to take purposeful, longer breaks at appropriate times. But I do think there's an element of hypocrisy there where I'm quite willing to, I'll say lecture, but almost like provide this overarching, all-knowing advice to people that work for me, when I don't actually do that myself. And I think part of that comes down to realising what my needs are day to day, but not realising some of my bigger, longer term needs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a bit of a, I wouldn't say adventure junkie outside of the defence stuff. I mean, I like to go surfing, trekking, outdoor stuff, canoeing, get on the beach. On the weekend, we're forward driving and sand tracks on Fraser and on North Stradbroke and trying to get the car bogged. And that's me. It's pretty cost effective. It's easy to access. It's good fun. And I can do 3 or 4 different things. And then we can head to the pub and have dinner and catch a few movies, and it's all pretty low key. But Mel's much more about being pampered, and she's much more about going somewhere and having someone else do the housework for her, do the laundry, tidy the beds when we're out, serve up amazing meals, bring her a cocktail while she's reading her favourite book on some deck chair by the pool or by the ocean. And she hasn't really expressed that. She hasn't expressed that. I mean, I sort of innately know that that's what she enjoys, and overseas holidays will do those things. It tends to cost a lot of money, and that's fine. That's what it is. But she's just been happy to go along with my Southeast Queensland adventure holiday, even though most of the time we're running around and we're driving here, there, seeing this person, jumping in the water, swimming there. She wants to hit the beach for 8 hours with a book, and I'm likely to get burned and get some skin cancers bubbling away if I'm out there for 8 hours. So we've got the umbrella and I'm bloody sunscreen up, and one of my best mates, Matt, he calls me Casper the Ghost because I just cream up and I'm just glowing like Casper on the beach. So she's got the Italian background and the Sicilian heritage and lovely olive skin, and I'm the white guy. Having copped a lot of, sun in my 20s, and now I'm hiding out under the umbrella. So it's this sort of mismatch. I said to her today, look, next time we're going to go away to Brampton or Hamilton Island or Hayman or something and just sit there for a week and do nothing. And she was like, would we? Could we? That'd be amazing. And I'm like, why don't you tell me this? Tell me this. Like, yeah, I've got an inkling, but I'm a guy. I can be ignorant about these things. Tell me what you want. And these holidays aren't doing it for you. Don't just put up with it. And she's like, yeah, but I know that's not quite what you're like and what you want. And I'm like, well, tell me and we'll have the discussion and we'll figure it out for both of us. Because I've had to glean, sure, it's not that hard, right? I had to figure out, maybe this isn't what Mel really wants. And I've come to this idea and put it to you, and you've told me that's exactly what you want. But I need you to put that out there and tell me so we can negotiate each other's needs and come to an agreement for both of us.
That's hilarious. Normally women are really good at articulating their needs. Well, my wife will tell me exactly what she needs, and she tells me exactly what she doesn't like. Sometimes it's really blunt with no filter, and I sometimes wish I could be like that. It's a double-edged sword in many ways, because the bluntness, I sometimes interpret that as rudeness and a little bit of arrogance, and I definitely don't like that. But at the same time, there's never any ambiguity about what she's expecting, whereas I'm the complete opposite. There's complete ambiguity about what my expectations are, and I feel like I always dance around the bush a little bit in the way I want to bring them out. I'd like to say things like, my expectation is that when I come home, dinner is on the table. Well, it's kind of one of those things where I really like it when I come home and there's like an awesome meal sitting there, but I don't dare say it because I don't know if I value it highly enough to put that out there and be that guy. I certainly am challenged in my relationship about not being clear, not being able to be really explicit and clear in what my expectations are.
I have exactly the same problem where my wife has no problem telling me what she wants or just doing what she wants to do. That's the great one, just doing it, where I'm super envious of that. But I think I have a similar situation where my wife will go along with what I want to do, but would much rather be doing a similar thing, sitting on a beach reading a book instead of gallivanting around or whatever the case is. And I'm wondering if that's a need on her part to want to help me or aid me or assist me, or when I'm out doing the thing I want to do, I'm happy commanding and being the man that she appreciates, and maybe there's something she finds attractive for a need for her, not necessarily she wants to be doing less or being pampered or whatever the case is, but fulfilling a need, seeing the person she loves happy or in their element. Both of those points, I guess I can relate. Currently, I'm just so unclear for the expression that I want to put forth, both right here, right now, and with my needs. I think my wife came from a household where she didn't want for anything, so it's easy for her to meet her needs in that regard. It's an expectation, whereas that's where I struggle. I'm struggling now to even articulate an example for her or for myself, but I think this is a really difficult topic for me today. And I want to sort of circle it back to the point of how do you give advice to a young man to tackle this subject? Where would a young man start to understand that his needs are important and that he's entitled to them without crossing over into that arrogance?
I mean, my view is there's not a particularly clear boundary there. If I was to have this conversation back with my younger self, and that's probably the way that I would frame this, is just being a little more in touch with what you're feeling. There was a long time there where I would feel things, but I just wouldn't have any idea about how to interpret them. I had no context around it being okay to feel something. And the idea of a man talking about his feelings was completely foreign. The big quantum leap for me in the way that I understood my needs was when I started meditating. And I started meditating out of purely a stress management thing. I was under so much stress and I was really struggling to manage my headspace, and I had nothing to lose. At that point, had a tremendous work pressure. So I just started some very basic techniques, breathing, did a bit of guided meditation stuff. But that was really the big trigger for me to go inside and start to understand a little bit more about who I was. that little bit of self-awareness and self-realization. A lot of the ideas around needs that rose out of that, there's always that tension that exists between a need that's being selfish and a need that's true and healthy. Through that process of meditating and self-exploration, for lack of a better term, I really got a sense for what was healthy and what was unhealthy through that process. There's a little bit about that identity piece that only comes from that inner contemplation for me, where I started to realize my identity. I understood my identity as an academic. I understood my identity as a professional. I understood my identity in a physical context in terms of being fit enough to go surfing and bushwalking and doing the physical aspects of my job. But there was an element of emotional understanding that I just didn't have. It took that inner contemplation to really surface that. So if I was to go back and have that conversation with my younger self, that would be my number one recommendation. I don't talk too openly about meditative practices. I don't know why. I just feel like some people take it the wrong way. It's almost like it's preachy. Some people see that as you know something that no one else knows type of attitude. So I don't raise that freely and talk about it really openly. But if I was to go back to my younger self, other than having children, starting that as a regular practice was the most profound change in my life, for sure. And I think for me, the understanding a bit more about me, what makes me tick, understanding my needs, those types of things really flowed from that point onwards. So if there was any takeaways here, I think starting to meditate and just getting a little bit more in touch with your inner self would be the number one thing for me.
The meditation is great for understanding, but I'm just curious on how that would translate into expression.
I think there's another piece that goes with the expression. That became far more real for me in being in circle with other men, because it is contextual. There is an element for me of a fairly toxic masculine culture growing up, where the more emotional needs were things that weren't talked about. Those were things that weren't cool or appropriate to be voicing to openly. Sex was fine. Pushing sex, demanding sex, joking about sex, covert contracts that are leading to sex, that stuff was all fair game. That's just par for the course. Actively expressing those needs in a healthy way, it really only came for me in being circled with other men and hearing other men talk and going, oh shit, I'm actually not that different. There are plenty of other men in this circle who I would regard as healthy men. They are masculine men in every sense of the word, but in an environment where there's trust and confidentiality and the ability to speak openly and freely from the heart, it was like, wow, we're all actually wired pretty much the same way. And that gave me confidence in being able to express those in a more healthy way. That it's actually not an unhealthy or an uncool or an unreasonable thing. And I think unreasonable is probably the key here. If I've got the context of being in a group of men who are all healthy, normal, holding down jobs, good relationships, not beating their wives, going out getting blind every night, they're not dickheads. And we're having a conversation where this stuff's actually, it's totally reasonable, totally healthy, and it's being raised in a constructive way. Yeah, for me, I think the ability to express that really came from the context of being around other men. And I think that's probably the power of conversations like this, is perhaps giving younger men a sense that, yeah, you know what, it's actually okay to have a conversation like this with other men. And if those men are turning around and ragging you for having a conversation about talking a little bit more deeply about some of your needs, they're not the guys you want to be around.
Yeah, I can agree with that fully, I think.
Sorry, before you go, Matt, I just took from that its experience. Within a circle of like-minded men, you have experience expressing yourself.
Yeah.
Or you gain experience
Yeah.
expressing yourself. And yeah, absolutely, you can take that into the world and get a bit of training in a safe environment to express yourself, which for me was missing from home, and it didn't come until this circle.
What I'd like to add to that is certainly the meditation piece, huge, right? Huge. This is the thought that comes from Jordan Peterson, that thinking is hard. Because what most people consider to be thinking is just self-criticism. And that was me in a nutshell, right? Adolescent years, super intense self-criticism, self-loathing, doubt, anxiety, shame, all levels. So a lot of things that I did act upon that I thought were needs just allowed me to escape that briefly. So like pursuing sex or getting drunk and wasted or acting like a clown. That saw me break through and get away from relentless self-criticism. And I couldn't de-identify from thoughts in my mind. I couldn't step back from destructive thoughts and behaviors and beliefs until I learned about meditation, the act of detaching the mind from the thoughts, from letting thoughts come and go and realizing that they're not who I am or they're not part of me, and that that's simply the mind being the mind. And that was through the act of meditation. And even now there's some really good teachers who will talk through it and won't necessarily get into meditation as much, like Tolle, And even Sam Harris, the neuroscientist, he's great because he's very broadly qualified and understands the brain to a T, really. In terms of what's a good test or a good way for me to express my needs, I think for me, and something that I've been very poor at, is boundaries. Understanding that there is a thing called boundaries, there is a thing which is about setting limits to the behavior that I'll tolerate from other people, or to disrespect, or whatever it happens to be, or to situations where I think I don't need to put up with a certain behavior or put up with a certain situation, and it's okay for me to call that quits and to pull the pin and to leave, whether that's respectfully or whatever, but to extract myself from that situation. And I was never able to do that as a youth. I don't know, low self-worth, and even the thought for me that setting a boundary, that was a form of expressing myself, and I didn't feel comfortable about expressing myself. I didn't feel comfortable about having that need. So to me, as an adolescent, having a boundary and acknowledging that boundary or enforcing it would have been super anxiety provoking, would have been extremely awkward. Even the thought was awkward. So I'd rather have nothing whatsoever and just go with whatever mates were getting up to, whatever bullshit as a teenager. And at some extent I'd pull out. I wasn't a bad kid, I had values and I'd withdraw, but it'd go too far. And I couldn't assert my self-value or my self-worth by setting a boundary clearly and openly and sticking to it. So I think that's a super powerful tool, super powerful concept, understanding what boundaries are, especially for young men, and seeing them as something to protect the character and something that's strengthening of the individual and strengthening really of the family and of the person's integrity.
I think it all comes back to expression. Being able to express yourself once you have the understanding of knowing your needs or what you want. I think that's my takeaway. I found the ability to express myself through dynamic meditation. For me, it's a cathartic exercise of expressing myself with no boundaries. I do it alone because it's embarrassing for me. I've cried, I've humped a pillow, I've beat my chest, I've beat chairs, I've expressed myself in ways that I never would in the world. It's given me a great understanding of my basic needs, but from our conversation today, I realised that I have a lot of work to do in this department, and I'm really grateful that we did this today, that I'm here today.
I had a few ideas of other conversations, but I think we've covered off on it pretty well, really.
Yeah, I think the takeaway for me is it's okay to have needs. It's healthy, and it's actually really unhealthy to repress them and not verbalise those, particularly for those needs that come from relationships.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you both. I don't have an outro, so...
That's what the theme music will be for.
Insert jingle here.
Do.